Welcome back to Foster Care, an unparalleled journey with Jason and Amanda Palmer, where our mission is providing strength to the weakest among us, from both kids in foster care and their biological families. We also talk about topics that affect all children and families. It is our hope that we can inspire you to become the best bio, step, foster, adoptive, or whatever kind of mom or dad that you can be. Part of our mission is inspiring others to become amazing foster families as well, if that is your calling. If it's not your calling, great. Find a thing that sets your soul on fire and go be awesome at that. Let's make our communities great together. Be sure to go by Jason M. Palmer and check out the blog post and other podcast episodes. You can search Jason and Amanda Palmer on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or anywhere else you get your podcast. If we don't show up, be sure to send me an email and let me know, and I will try to get it on there. We'd love to have you leave us some feedback in the form of a rating and review. It really helps the show gain attention. Hello, and welcome back to
Foster Care and Unparalleled Journey
with Jason
and Amanda.
Today we have a guest with us. We are talking to Erin Reader. Erin just turned 41 years old. She's been married to Scott for the last 10 years. She is a mother to two girls, 7-year-old Alexis and Liv, who's 11 months old. They live in a suburb west of Minneapolis, Minnesota, and she works for an IT solutions company. I know Scott through a group that we're in together, and he suggested that I talk with his wife about foster care and adoption because it was something that he said really resonated with her story. And so I contacted her a while back, and we sat and talked a little on the phone, and I wanted to bring her on here to tell her story. How are you doing today, Erin?
Great, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Hey, we're glad you could come in here. We're just going to open up the floor today and just say, what is the story that you feel like you need to tell?
Sure. Well, when I was asked if I wanted to talk about being adopted with you and your wife, I said sure. It's something that I don't really talk about a lot, mainly because it's something that's just kind of been a part of my life my whole life, and nobody really asks anymore. I will, talk about it if someone does ask, but it's something that's, just part of who I am, and it's never really been an area of concern, I guess. One thing that I wanted to do is to make sure that, there are some things that I've seen out there that people are hesitant to adopt, or they're, worried about adoption, but with me, I think it's something that I'm all for. I'm not going to tell people, how to live their lives when it comes to, women's rights and things like that, when it comes to fertility or healthcare, things like that. But I'm all for, if people want to adopt, want to have kids, want a family, I think it's a great option.
I agree. And well, obviously, I don't know how much of me and my wife's story but we became foster parents several years back, and we have adopted 4 of the kids that came to us through foster care. We've had about 20 kids come through our house. So, we're obviously on that same path there, although from a slightly different perspective. That story of being adopted is one that, we can talk a lot about having kids that we've adopted, but we don't have a lot of perspective on what it's like to grow up that way. And right. You were adopted at a very young age, right?
Yeah, I was 4 months old when I was adopted. The only way that, I think that the way that I know that is mainly because there's, pictures of me when I came to the United States from South Korea. That's where I was adopted from. There's pictures of my parents holding me right off the plane at the airport. My sister, I have a younger sister who's 2 years younger than me. She was adopted at about the same age also. My parents tell me that, what they did back in the day is, you signed up, you put your name in, and you got a picture of a kid. You could choose boy or girl, and my parents picked girls first. They wanted 4 kids total, but they ended up just having my sister and I because they'll say because she was crazy and they couldn't handle anymore, but they picked girls first. So they got my picture. They, the orphanage or whatever group that they used, would send them a picture of a baby, and give their information. And if there was something wrong with the baby, like I had a big birthmark on the back of my head, I guess. And so they let the parents choose if they wanted that baby or not. Then they could go back into the group or the waiting list until they had another baby selected for you. But they selected me, and then I came when I was about 4 months old.
Wow. So you don't have any real background information as to like your family's health history or anything like that? You didn't come with any of that information?
No, I didn't. The story that I was told, or that my parents were told, was that my mom was a single mom. My birth mother was a single mom who couldn't handle having a baby or couldn't afford it, or whatever the case was. She gave me up and didn't know, or, they didn't have any records on who my father was. So that was kind of out right away, finding out any information about him. And then the records are not great when it comes to finding your parents from South Korea either, especially back in the 70s.
Yeah, I could see that being really, really kind of scary. I know that's one thing that, excuse me, that we've kind of had to deal with, with our kids with adoption and everything, is not knowing that health history, that family background health history can be pretty scary because you don't know what to look for or what to watch out for.
Right. And when I go to the doctor, for my yearly physical, my doctor, I've had the same one for a really long time. She understands that, kind of look over everything, check for everything, because you never know what could be lurking in that genetic history for myself.
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of strange responses and looks from nurses and doctors when we've had to go see a specialist or go into the ER, and you have to put unknown for everything. And they're like, why? And then they want to know the story. And you've got your children sitting there and you have to rehash their story in front of strangers. And it can be kind of difficult sometimes to navigate.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know if it would be any better to know. Some ways it would, I guess, so you'd know what to look out for. But having that fear of something that could be the case might be worse almost. So just not knowing anything, I guess, is a little ignorance is bliss at this point. So
yeah, with foster care system, after the case is closed, that file is closed. And shy of it'd take one heck of a court order to get them to open it back up. So we try to learn everything we can ahead of time. That's what most people do, but there's only so much you can do.
Right.
So that's always, like Amanda said, that's always been interesting when people ask you questions, and you have to walk that road of how much of your of these kids' stories do you give away to other people, especially staying in the waiting room, the lobby, the doctor's office with people standing around listening. Because that's their story to tell. What was that like for you growing up when your parents were having to kind of tell people that? I mean, obviously you're from Korea, so you're Korean, and there's going to be some noticeable physical features there. They would make some assumptions, I would think.
It's kind of funny. Minneapolis is an area, I think, where there were a decent amount of kids that were adopted back in the 70s from South Korea. So I think it was more of something that you'd see it every once in a while and go, oh, I think they're adopted. And then, kind of go on your way. But at the same time, I think that there is a curiosity that people have. And I have been told by people who are trying to be nice that I look like my dad, which clearly I don't. He's like, the whitest white guy ever, and I'm not. So it is kind of funny when you see how people react to something like that.
I've had a similar experience. We were fostering a little guy. He was a newborn, and he was a black baby, and he was as dark-skinned a black guy as I've ever met. Just the happiest, cutest little bundle of joy you could ever ask for. But he was dark-skinned. And, everybody else can't see my face, but if you find a picture of me anywhere, I'm what you might call ambiguously brown. And my wife's maiden name is McClanahan, and her hair is red, right?
Right.
So this little guy, we had him at a restaurant, a little Chinese restaurant. We knew the lady who owned it, and she was, always real sweet and personable. She came over this first time we had the baby in there, and she goes, "Oh, he's so cute." I'm like, "Oh, yeah, thanks." He goes, "He looks just like you."
I'm really used to just saying that.
I think you're right. It was, but it's one of those things. It's a piece of that experience that most people don't know how to handle.
Yes. Right. And they probably don't want to offend you and don't know what to ask exactly. So they just, kind of say the same can thing that they would tell anybody.
Yeah, and as an adult, I can look back and I just smile at it because, let's face it, he was a cute kid. If anybody accuses me of looking like a cute kid, I'm not going to complain at this point in my life, But growing up, how did you feel about that when people would start asking questions? It sounds like you had a little bit of a community of people around you, so it wasn't completely out of the norm. But I'm certain there were questions. How did you feel about that when people would ask your parents or you questions?
Yeah, people would more ask my parents than me, especially if we were all together. But my parents were great about it. They had stayed in touch and were close friends with quite a few families that also adopted from South Korea. So I remember spending holidays or, just kind of, nights or hanging out with them and their families. And even some of them, a lot of them had kids that were also, their biological children and had adopted too. So it just kind of worked out for us. And we kind of had our own little community, which was great. I didn't even know about the stereotypes of Asian families until I got a little bit older, honestly, and how close-knit their families can be. But I think that, we were lucky in that regard because there are kids out there that don't have that and, feel quite alone when it comes to their community. They don't know where they fit in really, but I feel pretty lucky now just knowing that my parents thought that it's something that we needed to make sure that we were included in.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. Like it was just kind of the norm. Which is awesome that you had that support and that community, because back in the 70s, adoption wasn't talked about a whole lot. It was more of a family hush-hush secret, and you just didn't talk about it. And if you adopted, you didn't want people to know if you were infertile or couldn't have children, you just didn't share those things. They weren't talked about. So for you to have that community, that's really... I think that's really awesome because not a whole lot of people had that, especially back then.
Yeah. And it's funny because I remember it being such a slam, people would make fun of their kids and be like, "You're adopted," to their own siblings and say, "Oh, mom told me you're adopted," to make fun of their siblings. And it's like, why would that be a big deal? That's what I would think when I was little. It's like, well, you could have been a mistake. And if this one's adopted, they wanted you, so it's actually backwards in my opinion when I was growing up, because that's how I felt. I felt like my parents always wanted us because they couldn't have kids themselves. So
that's awesome. That's a really good perspective.
Mm-hmm.
That's really, really positive. It sounds like you had a very positive childhood.
Yeah, definitely. It was a good childhood. A lot different than some of my friends had, but at the same time, it's something that I try and create for my kids too.
That's awesome. How did the rest of your family handle it? I know, when we first started fostering, a lot of the kids who come into the system are from all kinds of a genetic background. Like I said, we had little Carl, which wasn't his real name because, we can't talk about real names, but we called him Carl. Mm-hmm. And, Carl was obviously not biologically ours. And for my dad and my wife's grandma and a few other people, there was some racism maybe that came from having grown up in the 40s and 50s. That was some they were not terrible overt stuff, but things that still they hadn't quite worked out in their life. And that was one of the things we went to our family before we even did it and said, hey, this is what we're going to do. And if you don't agree with it, that's fine. You don't have to, but we need to know ahead of time so we don't bring some kids around here that's going to cause some problems. And honestly, for us, it ended up being a real blessing. My wife's grandma really, Carl specifically, like she fell in love with that baby. And she grew up in rural Missouri, way rural Missouri. Like at 21, she left the town she lived in. And when she went to St. Louis, that was the first time she'd ever seen a Black person in person.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, they were way out there. So, I mean, there was some of that stuff that was just natural. We understood it was there. But through the family, there was going to be some questions and some issues. What did your family seem to think about, the idea of not only adoption, because adoption is a piece of it, but also an international adoption?
I think I don't know how they reacted at first. I can't say, because my parents both grew up in Montana. They met in Billings when they were in college. But Montana, even now, there's like barely anybody other than white people there for the most part. There's Indians or Native Americans on the reservation that they're definitely thought of in a certain way too, by the people who live there. And it's kind of funny because when we would go back there in the summers, my parents would get looks like, oh my gosh, you have reservation kids walking with, kids that are walking with these white adults and taking care of them. And they thought that we were actual Native Americans from the reservation quite a bit. But as far as family goes, I think, never had we felt any different, to be honest with you. I mean, I'll look back at some of like the old 80s pictures. We had perms, just like, any other 80s kid. We had, huge family gatherings and we stuck out like sore thumbs, but everybody was really great. Nobody that I know of, at least, had a problem with it. Adoption was quite a big part of my dad's family though, too, because he had a brother who ended up having 4 boys. And then once the boys grew up and left the house, they adopted 4 girls. And they're adults too now at this point, but they were all, from kind of troubled pasts. But that's just something that, his family did quite a bit of.
Wow, that's amazing that is a legacy that goes back that far.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that, that I look at as what our lives do, that legacy reaches so far, and you never know what the next 2 or 3 or 4 generations behind you, what change you'll spark. And that's one of the things that keeps us driving with some of the things we do, because you deal with a lot of kids who have a troubled past, who have struggles, or who otherwise might have had that troubled past. So that's such a positive thing. It's great to hear that your family was so supportive of that.
Yeah. It's my experience. It's just, I can only talk about what I've experienced, but the real true, issues or racism or, I guess treatment that was any different came from people out in the community, and mostly kids, to be honest with you, rather than anybody within my family. Kids are mean. They will say things without thinking sometimes. And, there weren't a whole lot of minorities where I grew up, in a predominantly, white area of Minnesota. But at the same time, it's something that we could talk to our parents about. I could talk to my mom about, especially, and she would understand and say, who cares what other kids think? It's no big deal, And it wasn't. At the end of the day, it wasn't anyways. So,
So you mentioned middle school. I remember middle school, and I do not look
Yeah.
back on it with any nostalgia or
Oh, middle school was hard. Kids
Yeah.
are
Yes.
mean.
And
Kids are so mean.
we've got two kids in middle school right now,
Oh,
and
yeah.
so yeah, the struggles is really tough for kids at that age. All the
Yeah.
developmental stuff that's going on top of everything
Mhm.
else in that age range. What was that
Yes.
like for you?
Middle school was like probably the toughest. And luckily I was able to go, my parents moved when I was 10, but they moved in the same city. So it's not like I had to go to a different district for school. Everybody would have changed schools anyways, from elementary school to middle school. But everybody's awkward and weird and nobody wants to be different. Everybody wants to kind of be, this cookie cutter kid at that point. But being totally different looking, at least, it was tough. I mean, kids would be rude. There was a kid in my neighborhood who was like super rude because you study in school, you study China and Japan, and that was it really back then.
Yeah.
There wasn't a whole lot of like, oh, there's other Asian countries. Like kids would call me Chinese all the time, and even in the last, I don't even know, like even in the last like 10 years, some of the developing countries in Central America, my husband and I went down to Honduras quite a bit when I was in my 20s. And they would call me China all the time. And because they had no clue that there were other countries other than just China and Japan, or they didn't think about it. So that's something that I struggled with quite a bit because, I'd say, me would be like wanting to correct them and say, no, I'm Korean. And then they like mock me and be like, oh, I'm Korean, haha, and still people ask me now, like, are you from North or South Korea? And I'm like, are you kidding? Do you think anybody's ever getting out of North Korea? Like, that's crazy. I don't know why you would even ask that, but it is kind of funny how people don't really have that kind of education about things at times, and
Yeah,
they just kind of talk.
Yeah, the geopolitics are something that, especially in the Korean culture, is pretty deep, but a lot of people don't think about that much. I mean, and we talked before, I was a Korean linguist in the military, and so I have a little bit deeper knowledge about the difference between being North and South Korean.
Right.
And the difference
more than I do by quite a bit.
and the difference between being Korean and other Asian ethnicities, that was one of the things we learned was that there's a lot of that racism between different countries,
Yeah.
I don't know that it's so prevalent now. It was a lot of years ago that I was experiencing that, but I know there was a lot of racism between the Japanese and the Korean cultures as well that goes back to the wars. And so that was a deep thing, and people just don't understand that. I've met a few people who are from, say, the Dominican Republic, and they do not take kindly to calling them Mexicans. It's one of the things that I don't think we educate our kids about enough and aren't educated enough about ourselves.
Right. And I mean, there are times like, how would you know that? How would you dig that deep into a culture when you're just going, when you're in school and you just want to get to the next thing and you want to learn broadly as much as you can? It's not something that people, unless you're trying to really find out and educate yourselves, you're not probably going to pass through it. But, it's something that is on my mind here and there, but it's nothing that I've had to, correct people on lately, luckily.
Well, that's always good. Have you ever thought about doing any of the DNA tests or that? I mean, I know you can learn a lot about some health histories that way, and also, you can even connect with some biological family that way.
Yeah, I talked about it like probably 2 years ago with my sister, and we talked about how, wouldn't it be crazy if we found, family out there somehow? My mom's been gone for she passed away 11 years ago, and that's something that I know she would have liked to have done. My dad, I know he's done one of those kits. My husband, I got him one a couple years ago, and I struggle with it though. She did get me a kit last Christmas, so 2018 Christmas, it's still sitting in the wrapper because I haven't gotten the guts, I guess, up to do it yet because, I'm not sure what I would find out. And, on one hand, I could find out that I do have family out there and try and connect with them. But what if they don't want to connect with me? That's something that I don't know if I'd want to go through emotionally or deal with that. And on the other hand, what if I find out that there isn't anybody out there? How kind of like polarizing and sad is it that to know that there just isn't? So I kind of am still struggling with that aspect. I do want to eventually. I have it. I just, I got to figure out a time when I'm mentally ready to do it.
It kind of sounds like, even though, you had parents and you were adopted, there's still maybe some unresolved issues with abandonment.
Maybe, yeah. I guess you could say that. I mean, part of me, okay, so there's this guy that I'm friends with on Facebook, and I don't know him super well. I used to play softball with him quite a while ago. He was adopted from South Korea also, and he recently reconnected with his family, and I see his posts about going back and hanging out with his siblings and meeting his mom and things like that. And I'm like, oh my God, that sounds amazing. Just because they're so, I don't know how much he's worked at it or what it had been like behind the scenes, but it looks like he's really connecting with them and, finding a part of himself he never knew he had. And that would have been like best case scenario, but at the same time, like, I know that's not going to be everybody's story. It's just his. So, maybe there is some of that, but, I'm pretty okay with how things turned out though at the same
Yeah,
time.
the unknown can be pretty scary.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's nothing to be scared of, if you step back and look at it, it's like, oh, more info is better. But there's always like that,
There's always the heart to
tangible
consider
fear.
though.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, there's always the heart that you got to think about.
Right, exactly.
Well, have you ever thought about if you could connect with your birth parents, what you would say to them? I'm certain you probably had that conversation in your head 1,000 times as a young kid. Have you thought about that much?
Yeah. I would definitely ask them about their health history, kind of what situation they were in at the time, and if I have any siblings or other family. It all depends. Like the next set of questions would be based on what their answers were, but that's exactly where I would start.
That sounds reasonable. I don't think I would. I would ask anything else. I don't know. That's one of those things that like I said, from our perspective, it's just so difficult to understand that side of it. And I think you have a very unique story in that way.
Thank you.
Have you talked with your did you ever talk with your birth parents about potentially connecting with, I'm sorry, did you ever talk with your bio parent? I'll get it straight. Did you ever talk with your adopted parents about possibly connecting with your bio family?
Yeah, I have one friend that was adopted that her dad worked for Delta Airlines, and they were able to go back like for, a couple times to Korea, and try and rifle through some of their old archives, which were, they said, handwritten in pencil books of, records, but they weren't able to find them. And I figured, she and I are very close in age. We're about 6 months apart. We went through the same agency. If she couldn't find them, I don't think there's going to be a chance for me to find them. So I kind of took her, what she did, and said, you know what, I bet it would be the same, and my mom is the one who told me about how that happened and what they did. So we talked about it quite a bit, and there's a part of me that kind of felt like they would ask questions like that just to see where I was mentally to make sure I was all right with things. But I never wanted them to make them feel bad.
Yeah, that's a difficult place for a kid to be. Do you have any other connections to the Korean culture?
Not really. My sister, um, when she was younger, I think she was like, I don't know, 6 or 7 maybe. Um, she went to Korean culture camp one summer. Um, Through the adoption agency, they kind of set things up for them. But my mom asked me if I wanted to go. I never wanted to go. I wasn't really that interested in it. I did like sports. I did a whole bunch of activities and sports and stuff like that every summer. So I thought that was a waste of time. I don't really care about it that much. Maybe now I would go do something like that, but
Well, I will tell you, as a semi-professional eater, Koreans have some of the best food. So, if for no other reason, that's one piece of the culture that I enjoy connecting with.
It's all about the
that's
food, right?
awesome.
That
Um,
is.
so I know you have two daughters. One is little, and the other one, I believe, is 7.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
have you
11 months and
shared?
7.
Awesome, congratulations, Mama.
Thank you. Thanks.
Have you shared with your daughter that you're adopted? Is that something that you guys are open with, or?
Yeah. Sorry. Hang on a second. Sorry. It's hard for me to talk about my mom a little bit,
Oh, you're fine.
especially.
You are totally fine.
I know she's been gone a while, but I haven't talked about her in a while when it comes to this kind of thing. So sorry.
Well, you're
Oh.
totally fine. I understand it. I lost my dad a few years back, and I understand the pain.
All right. Sorry, can you repeat your question again?
I was just wondering if you have two daughters, and one is obviously a baby, so she wouldn't understand right now. But I was just wondering if you and your 7-year-old had spoke about you being adopted, and if that was something that you had planned on sharing with your kids. And
Yeah, she knows I'm adopted. We've talked about it a lot. She knows I'm Asian. She'll, at first we would ask her, "Are you Asian at all, Alexis?" And she'll go, "No, I'm not Asian. Mom's Asian." So she doesn't really, I don't think at first she got what it meant. But, now she knows that, and she'll tell you that she's half Asian. But yeah, and she'll ask me questions every once in a while, especially maybe a year or two ago. She would ask me, "How come you're adopted? Did your parents not want you?" And I'll tell her the same, like, kind of canned answered story that, I'll tell anybody. But until maybe she's a little bit older to understand what it means to be married without a husband, or I'm sorry, to be pregnant without a husband and things like that. But yeah, she knows. And she would ask why. I think she's starting to understand. But I think it's something that she still processes too at the same time.
Well, yeah, I mean, she is only 7, so I mean, we all have to kind of,
Right.
kind of with our kids, you gear your answers and your questions towards age and everything like
Yes.
that.
Mm-hmm.
Are you guys in the future, maybe would adoption be something that would be on your radar? Is that something you guys are interested in because of your history and all that?
I don't know about anymore. There was a point in time when we, after we had Alexis, we had tried to have another baby for quite a long time, and it just wasn't happening. We were told to go see a fertility specialist. The regular, we trying to do things. We kind of exhausted all resources, and neither of us were getting any older. They said, "You probably will have to go this route." And I looked into adoption, especially from South Korea. That's what I kind of wanted to do, and try to adopt a baby from there. Right before we had made an appointment at the fertility doctor. So that put our plans on hold for anything other than that time. I don't know if we could do another kid again at this point, but it's I think our family's complete for the most part.
Well, can I just warn you? I thought the same thing at one point too.
I bet. Yeah.
And our youngest son's time is 19 now, and there's 4 more in the middle now.
Oh my gosh.
Our littlest one is how old?
4.
Yeah, he's 4.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and he doesn't know he's 4. He thinks he's still 2. He's trying to live out that terrible 2s as long as he can.
I bet, yes.
He's adorable though, so we put up with it.
They are cute. That's why I say, they're lucky they're cute when they're that age, just because, if they weren't, it might be a different story out there.
I don't disagree with you. As far as your adoption story, did you guys celebrate that when you were a kid, like in an adoption day or anything like that? And do you still do anything like that?
Yeah, my parents called it our anniversary. It was our kind of the day that they ended up getting us. We would celebrate by going out to dinner. That's usually what we did for our anniversary. I know my husband will call it a gotcha day and things like that, but we always knew it as our anniversary until we actually got married. But yeah, it was a day that we celebrated, and my parents always had a very positive emotion to that day, so did we.
Well, you hear so many stories about adoption and things gone wrong. I mean, and if you type in foster care or adoption into a Google search bar, one of the things that'll always populate up is like adoption gone wrong or foster care stories gone wrong. And that story is the one that sells that people hear so often. But it's great to hear of somebody who had such a positive experience around it. It sounds like it was really, really just an opportunity for you, to experience a full life.
Yeah, I have no clue what my life would have been like. I know if that, as a single mother with no father in the picture, especially there, I don't think it would have been life. And here I had every opportunity to do, pretty much what I wanted. No, I feel like, I wouldn't have had the same opportunities by far if I would have stayed in South Korea instead of being adopted by my parents.
Yeah, that's amazing. It sounds like all in all, it was a very, as positive of an experience as you could have. I mean, because one of the things that a lot of people don't think about is there's trauma even in a good situation like that, even what you might call a good adoption story. You still lost something. You lost your birth family. You lost pieces of your health history. You lost pieces of your ancestry, and knowing those stories about who your grandmother was or grandfather. I can tell you that my grandfather on my mom's side, him and I think it was 2 of his brothers moved into, I believe it was Iowa, and they married 3 sisters up there. And so, yeah, it was just like those stories that define who you are as a human. You've lost a lot of those. And so there's always that loss, that trauma and grief that I'm certain you dealt with as a child quite a bit. But it sounds like you've managed to turn it around and keep a very positive outlook towards the future as to how your whole life has turned out.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a person that's very black and white, when it comes to how I feel about things at times. I don't want to say turn a blind eye, but think about, I can take a step back and say, I lost this in this transition, or I lost that. But, at the same time, I gained so much more that gained doesn't matter what I lost at this point. So I'm okay with it.
Well, that's awesome. Do you have any other questions, Amanda?
Well, I know we're coming up on almost an hour here, so we do definitely want to be respective of your time. But I did have at least one more question. I just wanted to ask you, what would you say to other couples or parents or people out there that are looking towards adoption? What would you say to them? Whether it be positive, negative, just your thoughts on what you would want to say to those couples or parents out there.
I would say to those couples and parents out there that adoption is a great option. If you're willing to, fully embrace the process, if you're willing to bring a kid in and, communication open completely. If you're willing to do that and you have the ability to do that, I think it will work out well for you. Don't try and hide anything or hold anything back. I think that'll never help when it comes to trying to tell a kid that they're not adopted or spring it on them all of a sudden, because that's something that I always knew growing up and there was never a question about it. And, I actually felt fortunate in that way. So as long as you can be open and honest, I think it's something that's great for everybody. You can make a family if you can't make one organically, you can make one still. There's still options out there for anyone looking to have kids. There's a lot of kids out there that want, the love that parents can give. I just want to thank you guys so much for everything you do and for having me on.
Hey, we appreciate you taking your time to come out and talk to us today. Podcasts get really boring if I don't have somebody to talk to. Then it's just me rambling.
Sure.
But no, thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your story. That's not always an easy thing to do. It's not always easy to put yourself out there and kind of bare yourself to the world. So I just want to say thank you so much for that and for giving that perspective that we don't always have. There's always the stories of trauma and neglect and terrible things. And so it's great to have a good, positive story, one that we can put out there for people to hear. So thank you so much for taking the time to share that with us.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Thanks to everyone for listening all the way through. If you're trying to find us on a specific podcasting platform, just search for Jason and Amanda Palmer or Foster Care, An Unparalleled Journey, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. Leave us a rating and review on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, or anywhere where you find your podcast. You can also download it so that you can listen wherever you're at, even when you aren't online. You can find us online at jasonmpalmer.com, where you can read our blog and listen to all of our previous podcasts. If you have a story that you'd like to tell on the show, please send me an email at jasonmpalmer@yahoo.com and be sure to put podcast in the subject line. Or send me a message through our Facebook page at Foster Care, An Unparalleled Journey. We'll see you next time.